From 12 News, this is Newsmakers.
Riding a wave of national discontent, Donald Trump stormed back to the White House on Tuesday. With polls leading up to Election Day showing a close race, Trump's victory over Kamala Harris itself may not have been stunning, but the decisive nature of it was. Trump showed strength across the region, making gains in all 39 Rhode Island cities and towns, and winning a majority of communities in Bristol County, Massachusetts. This week, a political roundtable breaks down election 2024 and what the results mean nationally and locally on Newsmakers. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White alongside 12 News politics editor Ted Nesi. Joining us for the political roundtable, we welcome back Cara Cromwell. She's a political strategist. And of course, Joe, I'm on the air more than Tony Petrarca Fleming, who is our 12 News political analyst. Joe, thank you for all your hard work leading up to Election Day. You too, Ted. You did a pretty good job.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. All right, I want to talk about the presidential race, but I want to start locally in Rhode Island. Let's bring up the Rhode Island presidential results. Of course, Trump won the presidency, but Kamala Harris won Rhode Island 56 to 42%. Around the table, Ted, start with you. Did you expect Trump to do this well in Rhode Island?
No, I mean, he gained about 3 percentage points of support in Rhode Island versus the last election. And, you know, I certainly didn't think his vote share was going to go down much, if at all. I thought he'd maintain that base of support, but actually growing like that, best performance since 1988 for a Republican. That impressed me.
All right, Cara?
I was surprised as well, but I think it reflects kind of the national trend. And truth be told, when I saw the Rhode Island numbers come in, I knew he was going to win.
Was that a tell for you?
Yes, it was.
All right, Joe.
Well, I was a little surprised too, but as Cara just said, the national numbers, 92% of the counties in this country, Trump did better in. So, I mean, however, he did better in Rhode Island, but it didn't transfer down the ticket to other races in Rhode Island. They all still stayed very much Democratic.
Well, let me tell you what surprised me. We have, it's kind of a tradition in Target 12, we have Eli Sherman break down post-election day voter data, town by town and whatnot here in Rhode Island and in Massachusetts. This is what we call a heat map I want to bring up, and this one surprised me. And basically what you will see is the darker the reddish orange there, the greater shift of support Trump saw between 2020 and 2024. So what you're looking at is he made gains in every single city and town in Rhode Island, all 39. The darkest red on there, or darkest orange, I guess, is Central Falls. Central Falls. To be clear, Kamala Harris won Central Falls, okay? But I think Ted, he went up by 17. The margin was 17 points there, growth from 2020
Yeah,
to
I mean, it's such an interesting story in Central Falls. Trump has gone from getting about 15% in Central Falls in 16 against Hillary, grew to about 25% in 2020, and then to about 35% on Tuesday. Obviously, it's a city that's 2/3 Latino, and we see this in other parts of the country. Lawrence, Massachusetts, 80% Latino. Trump has shown enormous growth. Starr County, Texas, which I think is 96% Latino on the border. Trump has swung it to go Republican, and I think that's part of the shell shock of Democrats this week, is that they thought, they were the ones speaking to Latinos, and the way Trump talks about immigration and everything was going to be fatal to Republicans. I'm not saying he's winning because of how he talks about those issues, or the Puerto Rican joke or anything like that, but it's certainly not off-putting enough to prevent him from making big gains in that key demographic.
What's your take, Cara? And you can either do the Rhode Island take on growth in all 39 cities or towns, or as Ted brought up, the growth in the Latino vote for Donald Trump.
Can I do both?
You can.
I'm kidding. So just going to the Latino front first, I'll say abortion's a huge issue there too. I mean, reliably Roman Catholic, and I'll say kind of across all Latino communities, because I really hesitate to broad brush every, Colombians are different than Dominicans, and everyone has, different reasons why they're voting. I think I'm going to go back really in the Wayback Machine and say it's the economy, stupid.
I knew that would come up in this show.
Yeah, no, here we are. I think when people are going to the grocery store and paying twice as much for things like eggs and bread than they did 5 years ago, and I'm going to go back in the Wayback Machine again. Were you better off now than, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? The answer is no.
And Joe, specifically to you though, people looking at that map should not think that Rhode Island is becoming more Republican. Right?
No, I would not think that. I mean, Donald Trump, for example, did a lot better in Cranston and Warwick, two areas I was looking at, like 5% better. I mean, those areas, they still are Democratic, but he's moved up a little bit. The question is, can Republicans capitalize on that? At this point, we haven't seen that. The U.S. Senate, Congress, state house races, they did not capitalize on that. And I think that's where they have to start capitalizing first, not so much on president. President, I think, is a whole different level, the way people vote, than they do for local elections.
I'd also say, Tim, I mean, there's all sorts of questions about how Trump will govern, which of the things he said on the campaign trail he's actually going to try to do, which was bluster. But just speaking about politics, one of the biggest questions I have is how much is this a Trump phenomenon and how much is it a Republican phenomenon, right? Because Republicans had some trouble in the 2018 and 2022 midterms when Trump was not on the ticket. Yes, he was in office. Yes, he was a major issue, but he wasn't on the ticket. And so many people who support Trump say they feel uniquely connected to him. They feel he speaks directly. They like that he's a businessman. It's not yet clear to me he has carried that over to the entire Republican Party. And I think, again, that might be part of the challenge as Republicans in Rhode Island and Massachusetts look at these numbers and say, hey, there's huge opportunities here. Well, are there opportunities for every Republican or just Donald Trump?
I think it was a change election. I think that brought him back into office. The next midterms will be interesting. And again, my analysis of this gets a little old over time, but used to be when you had a party in power like that, they would get devastated in the midterms. So we should see the Republicans really lose seats in Congress and the Senate in the next midterms. And that's not necessarily a reflection on Trump. It's usually a reflection on the American people looking for some balance.
Yeah.
So,
and we saw a change in 2020. People didn't want Trump anymore. They went to Joe Biden. Things didn't get better under Joe Biden, so they want to change back. I think it's as simple as that. It's not a complicated matter. It's the economy.
And there was a pandemic at the time that played that just loomed large. All right, so look, and let's remember Trump. He's been campaigning for 12 years. Like, he can campaign very well. But shifting the focus to the Harris campaign.
10 years, I think, right?
2015.
When did The Apprentice start on the air?
10 years.
That's a good point.
He's had
Home Alone 2.
Exactly.
I'm thinking 3 presidential terms as well. But you're right. He's been a decade. He's been campaigning for a decade, so he knows how to do it. But what about the Harris campaign? You pointed out to me, Ted, yesterday that there's been some national news coverage that some unnamed people around Joe Biden have been kind of whispering to reporters that he should never have dropped out. What do you think Joe Biden would have done better than Kamala Harris?
No. Oh my God, read the room. No. It was going to be a change election anyway. It was going to be a repudiation of the Biden presidency. So I don't think he would have done any better, and I think it could have been potentially really embarrassing.
And was that Harris? Was she unable to decouple herself from the Biden administration?
Absolutely. She basically supported Joe Biden almost all the way through. At the end, she tried to separate herself, but it was too late. A lot of people's minds were made up that Joe Biden and her were one and the same.
Until The View.
And the Trump campaign kept saying Harris's policies. They weren't saying Biden's policies, it was Harris's policies.
Right. And
so,
we've
seen, kept it together.
It's extremely hard to run as the vice president of an unpopular president. We saw it. I mean, Hubert Humphrey in 1968 had the same problem. LBJ was unpopular. That's why he wasn't running. And Humphrey spent the whole campaign trying to figure out, I can't get too far from the president because I'm the vice president. And then at the very end, he's trying to break with him on Vietnam. And people just, it's clear to people, they're like, this is in some ways continuity. I also think, Tim, it's so important for Democrats who are upset to remember where they were in July after Joe Biden's debate performance. The bottom was dropping out of Democratic support coast to coast, including in Rhode Island. And I think if Joe Biden had stayed on the ticket, I think Democrats would have been slaughtered. I don't think they would have picked up any of the Senate seats they're holding on to. I think they might have lost 15, 20, 30 House seats. I mean, Kamala Harris, say what you will, if nothing else, kept them able to compete down the ballot.
And a good point, because back in July, Virginia was becoming in play, Minnesota was in play, New Mexico was in play. New Hampshire was in play. I mean, it would have been a landslide, I believe, for Donald Trump at the end. And you're right, a lot of these Senate and House seats could have gone the other way
Someone
very
like
easily.
Seth Magaziner in the 2nd Congressional District. I'm not saying he would have lost with Biden on the ticket. There would have been a lot more money here. It would have been a more active campaign. But he couldn't have taken his race as much for granted as he did, because I think the swing would have been much harder against the Democrats.
Well, why don't we talk about that when we have to go to a break? When we come back, it was actually a good night for the members of Rhode Island's congressional delegation that were on the ballot, but Washington may not be a very friendly place to them in January. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. So looking ahead to the next term, no matter who is in power, what is going to be a priority for you when you approach your first year of your next 6?
Well, the practical thing that I think can be accomplished in a bipartisan fashion is to put Social Security and Medicare onto a permanent, stable foundation.
Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White alongside Ted Nesi, Cara Cromwell, and Joe Fleming. This is a political roundtable breaking down Election Day. That was me alongside Senator Sheldon Whitehouse from I still call it the Biltmore, the Graduate Hotel in Providence, where the Democratic watch party was on election night. I will tell you that despite what was happening in the background in that moment, that place became awake very quickly. I think it was just the media left when I did my 10 o'clock live shot that night, and that was all because of the presidential race and the control of Congress, which is what I want to talk about now. Let's bring up the U.S. Senate control right now. It's back in Republican hands. As it stands now, still some seats being counted, 53-43. Control of power by Republicans. The House still up in the air, as we should point out. We're taping on a Friday morning. It's
the House. I think the Republicans will pick it up, but it's going to be super narrow. Whichever side ends up in control by just a couple of seats, which, as we learned, as Kevin McCarthy can tell you, that's a very combustible situation when there's just a handful of House members deciding every vote.
Yeah, it could be 2 or 3.
Someone said
majority.
Buckle up, because every Republican congressman is going to be a mini Joe Manchin in the new Congress.
So what does this all mean? I mean, obviously Jack Reed is losing the gavel as a chairman of the Armed Services Committee, will likely become the ranking member, right, of that committee. Does Rhode Island lose some of it? We've always punched above our weight because of the delegation there, primarily, I would say, Jack Reed and his seniority. What does this all mean now?
Well, I mean, on the one hand, part of why Reed has been effective is because a lot of the things he does is bipartisan. You know, every member of Congress likes sending money home, so he and his colleagues on the Appropriations Committee on both sides can usually find common ground. Armed Services. He and Roger Wicker, who's going to take over as chairman on the Republican, have a close working relationship, just as Reed did with John McCain when he was the top Republican. So, you know, there are some ways I think Reed will still have influence, but still, having the gavel, leading the Armed Services Committee, being in the majority on the Appropriations Committee, that's a change. Now, Rhode Island's they're not freshmen anymore, but basically brand new congressmen are still going to be in the minority, still near the bottom in their party of seniority. I mean, they're going to struggle, I think, a little bit to make their voices heard in the House.
And go ahead.
I was just going to say even
more.
more. I mean, I think our influence in Washington, losing a Commerce Secretary and a Commerce Secretary who has, I think, weighed in for us with transportation funding and things like that. It's going to be significant.
And I think it's what can they do financially now for the state of Rhode Island, our delegation? They're limited. I mean, they've been bringing money in for the Washington Bridge. Will they continue to bring more money in, not being in the majority? So, I mean, that could sort of dry up a little bit, and the taxpayers of Rhode Island may have to pay a lot more.
There's also a thing that I think we should think about, which is it's so easy when we analyze to just do our Republican versus Democrat, because that's the obvious one. But I think if we have in the control room Sheldon Whitehouse's outcome, the U.S. Senate outcome graphic, Sheldon Whitehouse got about, there it is, 60% of the vote to Patricia Morgan, 40%. Only a little drop in Whitehouse's percentage share compared with when he ran 6 years ago. Why that's striking to me, Sheldon Whitehouse ran ahead of Kamala Harris in Rhode Island. She got 55, he got 60. So he gained some people who weren't voting for her, presumably Trump voters. Now, if you were over in Massachusetts, Liz Warren ran behind Kamala Harris. And up in Vermont, Bernie Sanders ran behind Kamala Harris, only by a little.
So what message does that send to the Democrats?
Well, this is the thing. There's going to be this massive fight now within the Democratic Party, which our local delegation will be part of, about, you know, Bernie Sanders said instantly, the Democrats, Kamala Harris didn't think about the working class, basically saying you got to go be more like Bernie Sanders. I think when you look and see that the voters who know him best in Vermont or the voters who know Elizabeth Warren best in Massachusetts were less likely to back them than the mainstream Democratic presidential candidate, whereas a Sheldon Whitehouse, who is certainly a liberal Democrat but not quite as leftist as those two, I think that's a data point. I mean, I put that data out and it went viral yesterday because I think people are really interested in, is that actually true that moving left is what the Democrats need, or do they need to get more toward the center?
No, I think they need to work at home. And I think that both Bernie and Elizabeth are very focused. I shouldn't call them that. The senator from Vermont and the senator from Massachusetts are very focused on their national profile. And if you're at any event around Rhode Island during the week or on the weekend, you see Senator Whitehouse. You see him there. People are familiar with him. He does the retail politics that will keep him in office.
And we have to go to a break, but before we do, can we bring up Congressman Magaziner's results in this race here? And I want to ask, Cara, you have run a congressional campaign before. All due respect to Steve Corby, he just didn't put any money at all, really, into this campaign, but he still got 42%. So if there's a Republican thinking of running for Congress in CD2 in 2026, do they look at this and go, ooh, if I have real support and I put a ground game together, I got a shot, or is the midterm going to just be too daunting?
I mean, you have a shot at 42%, and then that every little bit above that is going to be a tremendous
Well, is that the new
effort.
CD2 basement?
I would say that is probably the basement, because I think he put so little into the campaign that he didn't actually have to file a campaign finance report.
I believe that's true.
Which I believe is less than $5,000.
And we saw a strong Republican 2 years ago, Alan Fung. He ended up getting 47%, and the concern there was he couldn't get higher than that.
What if Alan ran in 24?
I think Seth would probably have still won. Would have been close.
It's also the dynamics change so much. Right. This is what's hard for people to understand, is that it's not static. So, okay, Alan Fung gets back in, and the polls are relatively close. As you reported, Seth Magaziner doesn't even live in the district. So, there's all sorts of things you could hit him on. But wait, all of a sudden, the Democrats say, we're not giving up that seat in Rhode Island. Right. And what happens? Massive money comes in. Seth Magaziner runs a much bigger campaign. Alan Fung is facing a question about Trump every day. I mean, there's plenty of House seats that were marginal that still went to Democrats the other night because it's tough for Republicans in these blue-leaning areas.
In close races in Rhode Island, at the end, over the years, I've seen Democrats come home. That happened with Magaziner 2 years ago. So I think if you had a tough race, the Democrats would have come home again, too. All
right, we're going to take a break on Newsmakers. We talked about the power in Congress. When we come back, power at the Rhode Island State House. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers and this political roundtable. Ted Nesi, Joe Fleming, and Cara Cromwell. On Thursday night, I believe it was, right? The Rhode Island Senate Democrats caucused. Dominic Ruggiero held on to the presidency. Our colleague Alex Torres-Perez caught up with him as he left the meeting. And I do want to point out this happened on live television right at the top of, I believe, our 10 o'clock news. Take a listen.
I'm pleased, and that kind of says it.
Yeah, and so you were assuring them that you are healthy enough to do the job, yes. And there are some concerns among senators. Anything you want to say about those concerns?
They should be concerned, but I think everything's going to be okay, and we'll see what happens in the next couple of months.
Yeah.
So, Ted, you've been reporting on this quite a bit. Senate President has been dealing with some health problems. Senator Ryan Pearson sought the presidency. He lost. It just feels like there's a lot of turmoil in that chamber right now.
Yes, and I think, it's driven by Senator Ruggiero's health not coming back in the way that his aides had telegraphed last spring, that he'd be sort of back to full force by late in the session. And so he was mostly absent throughout the summer. You see him here at the caucus, and I think, I still think there's enormous goodwill toward Ruggiero. I mean, he's been in the Senate since 1984. He's a gentleman to his colleagues. I think, I don't think this is personal at all. I think it's a fear among senators that having an ill Senate president against a very powerful Speaker of the House, Joe Shekarchi, is putting the Senate at a big disadvantage in terms of getting legislation across the finish line. And so Ruggiero still has the votes. There's enormous power when you're in the job already to hand out chits and keep your people on sides. But the fact that many senators were willing to break with him publicly at a public meeting, very
wasn't
unusual.
A secret ballot.
No, and so that just tells you how high the frustration level is.
That's a risk for them, right, Joe? I mean, you vote against the Senate president. Buy to the chairmanship.
You're sitting in the back bench, and a couple of those people were chairmen of committees. They're going to probably lose those.
Maybe parking at the Providence Place Mall.
What I noticed was most of those 9, if I'm correct, Ted, correct me if I'm wrong, were progressives.
Generally more on the progressive side, yes.
More on the progressive side. And however, there were 6 new senators, and every one of them backed the current president.
I wonder if it were a secret ballot, what the vote would have been. All right, can we zoom back to the presidential race? Well, I want to kind of end. We have a few minutes left where we started. And Cara, Kamala Harris, does she run again?
I hope not.
Why?
Because I don't think she would be successful. I don't think. I think they need to start anew. I think they need to take a look at why they lost. I'm going to go back to their message was bad, and I think if you have the same people, kind of participating in the recipe, it's not going to come out well the next time.
And I was talking to some people in Washington about this overnight after the election and in the days since, and a dynamic we can lose sight of, but we should keep in mind. Trump has now been the Republican nominee in 3 elections, and some Democrats get frustrated. People still say he's an outsider. He's been president. He's been a politician for years now. Fair enough, but we all know he's very different from most other politicians. And who have the Democrats put up against him? Very, very insider Washington established people. A former first lady, then a guy who'd been on Capitol Hill since 1974, 72, and now the sitting vice president who'd come up through very blue politics in California. I mean, I had one senior Democrat float to me, maybe we should be running someone like Mark Cuban next time, the businessman who backed Harris, but who's like certainly an outside of politics figure. I'm not sure that'll happen. I don't know if the Democratic Party has the DNA for that kind of unorthodox choice. But then again, we would never have said Donald Trump could win the Republican nomination if we were sitting here after the 2014 election and look what happened. So I do think this was enough of a shellacking and a message to Democrats that there may be a wider range of potential paths discussed.
No, I was going to say I agree with Ted totally. 4 years is a long time, however, and I expect we're going to see a nominee that we probably don't see right now. Like we never saw Barack Obama coming up to be the nominee when he was. So Bill Clinton, we never saw being the nominee either. So Democrats can surprise you at times.
I wonder if it's less about the candidate, and we have 1 minute left, less about the candidate, or does the Democratic Party have a branding problem writ large?
You listen to a lot of Democrats who say they do. Tim Ryan, who ran stronger but still lost for U.S. Senate in Ohio 2 years ago, said it's just very hard to go around saying you're a Democrat in a lot of places in America right now. And while Democrats would argue, well, it should be hard to say you're Republican, that you're MAGA, in the end, when the two options were presented to the public, they said, I'll go with Republicans, I'll go with MAGA. And so, the other thing is, look, we haven't really touched on it, but very briefly, I just want to say, Donald Trump has said he might do some very unorthodox things as president. And I think, is he going to do that? And what will the reaction will be to that? Or was a lot of it talk and he's just glad to be vindicated and we just don't know. And I think that's a huge question for the next 4 years.
You two need to go home and get some sleep. It's been a long week. Cara Cromwell, Joe Fleming, Ted Nesi, thanks so much. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.